Under the grim, slate-gray skies of Washington, D.C., the federal courthouse stands like a mausoleum of buried truths. Today, it will become an arena where the definitions of patriotism and treason collide in spectacular fashion. The security barricades are up. Every news network has their cameras trained on the entrance. Inside, the spectator seats are already filled with journalists clutching recorders, lawmakers with folded arms, and citizens who sense they're about to witness history being written in real time. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the trial of Karoline Leavitt, the youngest White House spokesperson in American history, who now stands accused of treason. Her crime? Revealing classified information about Operation Iron Curtain, a military mission that resulted in the unnecessary death of a young soldier named James Bennett. If you've ever wondered whether one person can stand against an entire system of power, stay with us. This story might just restore your faith in the possibility of justice. The courtroom is a theater of contrasting forces today. On one side sits Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas, draped in his black robe like a vengeful deity. His face is a masterpiece of controlled emotion, not a flicker of doubt, not a hint of humanity, just pure institutional power personified. The gavel in his hand might as well be a hammer ready to nail shut the coffin of truth. And then there's Karoline Leavitt, walking into the courtroom alone, no entourage of lawyers, no whispering advisors, just a 27-year-old woman in a simple red dress that stands out against the monochrome backdrop, like a declaration of war. She carries only an old leather briefcase, its corners scuffed from countless White House meetings. But today, this worn-out case contains something far more potent than policy papers. The silence in the room is absolute as Thomas speaks. Karoline Leavitt, you have been summoned here today for actions that directly threaten national security. This court has evidence that you deliberately disclosed classified information about Operation Iron Curtain, resulting in severe consequences. This is treason. You will answer to the law. The word treason hangs in the air like a blade. A woman in the gallery covers her mouth. A congressional aide types furiously on his phone. But Karoline Leavitt doesn't flinch, doesn't blink, doesn't even shift her weight. If you believe in standing up for truth even when your knees are shaking, hit that like button now. Sometimes courage doesn't roar. It simply shows up in a red dress with an old briefcase. Thomas continues, his voice now edged with steel. Specifically, you posted information on X about the death of soldier James Bennett during Operation Iron Curtain. This action seriously violated security laws and threatened ongoing operations. He leans forward, eyes boring into hers. Do you understand the severity of this charge? The courtroom holds its breath. And then, like a beam of light cutting through dense fog, Karoline lifts her head. Her eyes meet Thomas's, not in defiance, not in fear, but with a calmness that seems almost otherworldly, as if this moment was inevitable. And then, remarkably, she smiles. A small, nearly imperceptible smile that nonetheless causes the entire room to shift uncomfortably. Your Honor, she says, her voice neither loud nor high but resonant and clear. Before we continue, I have just one question. She places her hand gently on the leather briefcase, her fingers tracing its worn surface. Have you ever opened this briefcase before? The courtroom freezes. The question isn't a threat. It's a doorway to something larger, deeper. A juror leans forward unconsciously. A reporter forgets to press record. And for the first time, Clarence Thomas's eyebrows furrow, not in anger, but in calculation. He starts to speak, then stops. Karoline doesn't wait for his answer. She steps forward, just one step, but the entire room seems to tilt under its weight. Then let's begin, she says, her voice still soft as a breeze but sharp as a blade. Because truth waits for no one. With a definitive click of the briefcase latch, sounding like a gunshot in the silent room, the truth begins to speak. Under the cold yellow lights of the courtroom, while all eyes remain fixed on Karoline's weathered briefcase, she removes something unexpected. Not a classified report, not sophisticated electronic evidence, not a meticulously prepared legal document. Instead, she produces a crumpled piece of paper, folded in quarters, stained with coffee with one corner singed by fire. I would like to read a letter, she says, not from me, but from a mother America has forgotten. Then she begins. My name is Laura Bennett. I'm writing this letter at 3 a.m. in an empty kitchen. I just received my son's bloodied helmet and a neatly folded flag from 3 young soldiers. They called my son a hero. But nobody told me why James died. Nobody gave me a hug, an explanation, an answer. Just a closed door and a void no one can fill. Caroline's voice doesn't waver, but the listeners can't maintain her composure. A young woman in the back covers her mouth, trying to stifle a sob. An older man, likely a veteran, sits up straighter, his hands clenched into fists on his knees. For those few minutes, the letter isn't just words. It's the soul of a mother desperately searching for the truth about her son's death. Who among us hasn't felt the sting of institutional silence when we desperately needed answers? Comment below if you've ever witnessed someone fighting against all odds for truth. Karoline continues reading. They told me James's records were classified, that I had no access rights. But I don't need to know tactical details or state secrets. I just want to know if my son called for me at the end. If someone held his hand. If anyone told him his mother was waiting for him to come home. She looks up, her eyes no longer containing just courage, but also the silent pain of carrying someone else's burden. She says, Your Honor, you accuse me of treason. But if treason means standing up for a grieving mother's voice, then I accept the charge. She places the letter on the table, then pulls out another stack of papers. Documents stamped with red, declassified, do not redistribute. All eyes follow her movements, as if watching a bomb being defused. This is the internal report on Operation Iron Curtain, recently declassified by the Department of Defense after I filed a FOIA transparency request. It clearly states the time James Bennett was wounded, 3:16 a.m., and the time of death, 3:54 a.m. That means he survived for 38 minutes after being shot. A murmur erupts. 38 minutes. Not instant death. Not killed on impact. 38 minutes. Enough time to get emergency care. Enough time to save a life. But why wasn't he saved? Karoline flips to the second page. Page 4, Section 3.2.7 states, backup medical equipment was reallocated to civilian contractor teams in the area per special directive from above. In other words, the only medical equipment that could have saved James was given to a non-combat group because they paid more money. The atmosphere in the room shifts from sorrow to outrage, a feeling of betrayal spreading like an oil slick. Young soldiers sacrificed not by bombs and bullets, but by decisions made in closed boardrooms where human lives were valued less than financial interests. Thomas twists in his seat, his hand tapping the edge of the bench, the first sign he's losing control, but Karoline doesn't stop. Your Honor, I didn't reveal state secrets. I exposed a death that was covered up, a truth that was suffocated by those in power. She pauses, then looks directly at him. And if that makes me a traitor, perhaps we need to redefine what country means. No one speaks. And then, as if choreographed by the universe itself, the door at the back of the courtroom swings open. Light footsteps echo as a gray-haired woman in a simple snow fabric coat enters, clutching a picture frame. No one introduces her, no one escorts her in, but everyone knows she is Laura Bennett. She walks straight to the center of the room, facing the judge's bench, and in a deep, hoarse voice says, I have nothing left to lose. I have no son anymore. But I still have a voice, and today I'm using it to ask why you chose money over Jimmy. The room nearly explodes with emotion. No one dares interrupt, no one dares stop her. Karoline steps beside Laura, gently placing a hand on her shoulder, and says, I'm not standing here to defend myself. I'm standing here to give back the truth to her, and to every mother who has lost a child in darkness. Like a painful symphony, sobs echo throughout the room. But in that moment, Leavitt is no longer the defendant. She is the witness, the speaker, the one who transforms pain into truth. The crumpled letter, once folded and buried in a mother's grief, has now become the flame that incinerates every false accusation. Subscribe to our channel for more stories of courage in the face of power. When systems fail, individual voices become our last line of defense against injustice. The entire room is silent, as if someone has sucked out all the air. What Karoline Leavitt and Laura Bennett have brought isn't an ordinary defense. It's an awakening bell, a powerful blow to the chest of everyone present. But what makes this trial immortal isn't found in moving words, but in the undeniable truth being dragged out of the shadows, like pulling teeth from the mouth of power itself. Leavitt doesn't stop with the letter and declassified file. She gently opens a smaller pouch inside her briefcase and extracts a tiny recording device that fits in the palm of her hand. She holds it up, looking directly at Clarence Thomas. Her gaze suddenly becomes a spotlight, shining directly into dark corners. And here's the voice I couldn't let die with James, she says, pressing play. A voice emerges. Hoarse, slightly trembling, but deeply human. It belongs to Dr. Rachel Cullen, a military doctor who was deployed to the Operation Iron Curtain site. The recording starts with mild static, then, "I'm military Dr. Colin. I tried to save JB. He was still alive when I arrived. The wound was serious but not fatal. But I was stopped, ordered to prioritize equipment for a special group. I asked who gave the order. They just went silent. I watched him. His eyes were still conscious. He said, 'My mother is waiting,' and I couldn't save him. I couldn't do anything." The courtroom collectively holds its breath. Several people place hands over their hearts. A juror bows his head, silently wiping his glasses. Leavitt turns off the device but doesn't put it down. She squeezes the recorder tightly, as if holding her own heart. "Dr. Colin couldn't be here today because she's been recalled by the very agency you represent, Justice Thomas. But she left these words because she couldn't bear any more sleepless nights." Then, without hesitation, Karoline steps to the central table reserved for attorneys, and from her document case, she removes a small silver USB drive. In that moment, it seems to hold the fate of an entire nation. She holds it up. On this USB is a recording of an internal call between two high-ranking officials. One of them is you, Justice Thomas. Thomas sits up abruptly. For the first time since the beginning of the trial, he loses his customary cold demeanor. A new wrinkle appears prominently on his forehead. He tries to interject, but Karoline doesn't give him time to react. She plugs the USB into the court's projector and presses play. The sound rings out, clearer and more stark than before. A familiar man's voice says, "If his mother investigates too deeply, just let her get lost in the paperwork. This can't get out, understand? Especially Leavitt. That girl talks too fast." A second voice responds, somewhat tense, "But what if she goes public?" Then Clarence Thomas's own voice replies, "Then we crush her. Public opinion will turn against her, call her a traitor. We control the news. No one will listen to a 27-year-old girl." The moment the recording ends, the space fills with a soft gasp, an involuntary sound from a spectator. But it isn't mockery. It's astonishment turning to anger as a power system is exposed, using tactics to hide truth and crush anyone who dares speak up. Leavitt turns back to face the entire gallery. And for the first time since the trial began, she raises her voice. "People used to say, when you have truth, speak softly. When you only have power, you must shout. Today I'm not shouting because I have the truth, and what you've just heard needs no defense. It is evidence." Justice Thomas tries to stand, but he's too late. An elderly man in the audience rises first, an old man in a worn military uniform, leaning on a cane. He holds up a faded photograph of himself and James Bennett at training camp. He says nothing, just silently stands there, a living symbol for the so-called honor being bartered away. Karoline turns to the judge, her voice now aimed not just at him, but at all of America. "You may call me a traitor, but if betrayal means daring to speak truth in a world manipulated by lies, then I'll gladly betray again." Then she lowers her voice, softening like a mother comforting a hurting child, "And if this truth makes you regret, it's not too late to start doing what's right." The entire gallery stands, not with applause, not with cheers, just silent solidarity, a unity that power cannot manipulate. The trial is temporarily suspended, but the battle has only just begun. The atmosphere in the courtroom no longer resembles a trial. It's more like a church awakened by strange bells, not from a high tower, but from the silent pain of a nation too long forced to believe whatever those in power defined as truth. When the USB is removed, when Clarence Thomas's voice still echoes in everyone's minds, when Karoline Leavitt quietly returns to her position, another door at the back of the courtroom opens again. No announcement, no prediction. But once more, someone enters and brings the entire gallery to a standstill. It's a young girl, about 12, with brownish blonde hair tied neatly back, worn flat shoes, and a simple dress. She says nothing, just holds a small picture frame containing a photograph of a young man in military uniform, smiling radiantly in the sunlight. She walks directly to where Karoline stands and offers her the frame with both hands. Karoline bends down to accept the photograph. The girl looks up, her voice trembling but clear. "This is my brother Jam. He said he'd teach me to drive when I turned 16, but now he's never coming home." Several people in the gallery cover their faces. An old senator begins to cry. Clarence Thomas sits motionless, eyes fixed on the table as if trying to escape the image of the girl before him. The girl continues, "No one would tell us why my brother died. Mom just cries, but Ms. Leavitt, you told the whole country the truth about him. I don't have anything to give you except this." She reaches into her pocket and pulls out an old military medal with worn edges that has lost its shine. It's the medal posthumously awarded to James Bennett. The girl holds it, staring intently at the only thing left of her brother, then says, "They gave me this, but I don't know what to do with it. I want you to keep it." The room is deathly still. Not one person, judge, senator, reporter, or veteran, dare say anything in that moment, because everyone knows that in that instant, the medal has become the final evidence of an unforgivable sin, not Leavitt's, but of the system that remains silent. Karoline kneels, taking the girl's hands, her eyes welling with tears for the first time since the trial began. She doesn't need to say much, just places the medal against her chest and nods slightly. Then she turns to the judge, and her voice this time isn't a declaration but a plea. "This is no longer my trial. This is the final cry for help from the forgotten. And you know it." Laura Bennett steps forward from behind, carrying a small wooden chair, a simple breakfast chair with one leg worn down, its surface covered in scratches. She places it in the center of the courtroom facing the judge, then softly says, "This is the chair Jimmy sat on every morning before school, before enlisting. Every morning I made eggs for him, and he'd tell me about school, about his friends. After he died, this chair stayed empty. I didn't put it away. No one dared sit in it." Karoline places the medal on that chair, next to the photo of James that the little girl brought. A sacred silence descends. No one gives orders, no one objects, but each person stands, bowing their head in succession. A retired general silently removes his cap. A congresswoman takes from her purse her late husband's old wedding ring, lost in war, and places it on the court table. A war correspondent breaks into heaving sobs, the final note in her notebook, just 3 scrawled words. "Truth wins anyway." Clarence Thomas looks around. No one in the gallery views him as a judge anymore. They see him as a man who once had the chance to do right but didn't take it. He takes a deep breath, places his hand on his forehead, then looks at Karoline, for the first time not with anger, but with a heavy sadness. He stammers. "I didn't know that boy." Karoline doesn't let him finish. "True, you didn't know him. But you knew the system you served, and you knew you let it kill people like James. You didn't need to know his name. You just needed to know you were silent when you should have spoken up." Thomas bows his head once more. No one speaks, but the entire courtroom knows he has been defeated. Not by words, but by living witnesses, by memories, by that empty wooden chair. Who do you think showed more courage in this moment? Karoline confronting power, or Laura bringing her son's empty chair? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Hours after the trial concluded, the scene outside the federal courthouse hadn't quieted. People didn't leave immediately. They lingered, as if trying to hold on to the unexpected moment, when a young woman with an old leather briefcase and a crumpled letter made an entire power system fall silent. No one needed news reports to know what had happened. They had witnessed it firsthand, and they knew that even without an official verdict, truth had been acknowledged, and lies had nowhere left to hide. Inside the courtroom, the old wooden chair that Laura Bennett brought remained. On its seat, James Bennett's photo and the tarnished medal still lay undisturbed, a wordless affirmation. This was the first trial where the silence of an empty chair spoke for millions of people. And then, while the country was still in shock, brief news came from the Supreme Court office. Justice Clarence Thomas officially resigned. No press conference, no farewell speech, no explanation needed, just a short statement with 3 lines. "I have served. I have been silent. Now I depart." This quiet departure couldn't cover what had been revealed in the courtroom, but it was an indirect admission that even the most powerful cannot sit still when truth is exposed before the public eye. Karoline Leavitt did not appear in the media afterward. She gave no interviews, posted no articles, accepted invitations from no television programs. She simply returned quietly to her home in New Hampshire, where snow-covered hills and a small house by the pine forest stood peacefully, as if no political storm had just swept through her life. That evening, Karoline sat on the wooden porch, holding her small son who slept in her lap. The child leaned against his mother's chest, fingers clutching the coarse fabric necklace where she now wore James's old medal. On her lap was a brown paper envelope with no sender's name. Opening it, she found only a small piece of paper with slanted handwriting. "Karoline, You gave Jimmy a voice, something this entire system never gave my son. I have nothing to offer you but gratitude, Laura." She smiled, kissed her son's forehead, then gently folded the letter and placed it on the shelf beside James's photo, now framed in wood and hanging in the center of the living room. In that house, there were no titles, no new medals, no certificates of recognition, but one thing was clear. Karoline had done what no politician, no court dared do, rekindled the flame of justice through courage. The next day, people began gathering in front of the federal courthouse without anyone calling them there. Individuals, small groups from across America, veterans, mothers, young people who had never known war, brought wooden chairs from their homes and silently placed them before the courthouse gates. No shouting, no cameras recording, no speeches, just hundreds of chairs of different colors, styles, and heights, all empty. Each chair was a reminder needing no explanation. Here once was a person, and that person deserves to be remembered. A child about 10 years old placed a small plastic chair with a paper taped to it. "If this chair could talk, it would tell you about my brother." An elderly woman sat panting after placing her chair, then gently placed her hand on a stranger's shoulder, tears welling in her eyes. "I also lost someone like James." Karoline wasn't there, but what she had awakened lived on, in every story people shared, in the eyes of those who thought they had given up, and in the collective consciousness of a nation that had forgotten its smallest people. In a rare conversation with a local broadcaster, when asked what kept her from running away, staying silent, or choosing the safe path, Karoline just smiled and answered, "Because there are people with no voice left who still deserve to be heard. And because if no one spoke up for James Bennett, who would speak for my son if one day he too becomes a buried name?" She paused, then said softly, "The empty wooden chair in the courtroom that day wasn't just where Jimmy once sat. It was the place reserved for our conscience. And I simply pulled it out for someone to sit in again." The story of Karoline Leavitt, of the wooden chair, of a letter written at 3 a.m. in a cold kitchen, has touched the deepest part of each person's soul. And people realize that justice isn't a verdict. Justice is when truth is called by its right name, and the smallest person also has the right to be remembered. If the story of Karoline Leavitt and James Bennett's empty wooden chair touched something in your heart, please share this video so more people can hear the voice of truth. Like, subscribe to our channel, and leave a comment if you believe one person can change an entire system through courage and compassion. And remember, every empty chair has an untold story. Don't let it be forgotten forever.